Hey, y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle housing market watch for September 23rd, 2025. Welcome back, everyone. This is our first market watch of the fall, and we're just getting into the last push, the final seasonal push for the housing market here in Seattle. And we're already starting to see some of those things reflected in some of the data here. And just a quick heads up, we filmed the last one on the 18th, and this is the 23rd. So there's not quite 7 full days of data, so you have a little bit of carryover. But when we look at these market watches week over week and just a quick snapshot of the King and Snohomish County inventory, I want you to be aware that there's a little overlap here, but still a good illustration of what we've been seeing. And we saw here over the last week a slight decline in the new listing, 775 versus 930 the previous week. We also saw about the same amount of price reductions, 611 versus 610. We saw a similar amount of pending sales, right? 888 versus the 861. And you'll notice that those numbers are really keeping up with the amount of new listings. And we're going to see, a little sneak peek, that we're witnessing more multiple offers again than we were earlier in the summer and even in the late summer as we start off the fall. Now, the mortgage rates are a big factor here. And we've been talking about mortgage rates, well, really for the last few years, a little bit more specifically over the past month or so, because we've been seeing the mortgage rates trending down. We've been seeing the markets, specifically the mortgage market, shifting as we're seeing people responding to conversations around Fed rate cuts and the inflation data. I personally think that the inflation numbers are still a little higher than I'd like them to be. But I'm not the one that makes the rules or the policies. We've also been seeing the government starting to buy, and quantitative easing is what it's called, and artificially reducing the mortgage rates too. So you have a little bit of that in the mix right now too. And mortgage rates were earlier in the year up around 7% or even a little bit more. But we've been seeing, according to Mortgage News Daily's survey, that the mortgage rates have been hovering more in that 6.25%, and they've bounced a little bit since the Fed rate cut. Again, there's no direct correlation here. The Fed rate cut, we've seen the rates pop up to 6.37%. That was the same number we were looking at last week in our update, and it's the same number that we're seeing today. So there hasn't been much variance in those numbers over the past week, kind of stabilizing in that 6.4-ish range. Now, one thing we were talking about last week for King County specifically is that we've been seeing more competition in the market, and this has continued. We still are seeing houses selling for just a little below asking price on average, 99% of the asking price. We're seeing a median sales price that's almost identical, $950 was the median sales price in King County over the past week. And we're seeing the same thing if we look back the previous week, $953. So pretty much the same as far as the pricing goes. But interestingly, we saw another uptick in the pending sales with multiple offers. 29% of all listings in King County over the past week had multiple offers. And again, some of the places like Seattle and Bellevue and the East Side specifically had more of those than other places in King County. We also saw more pending sales that had the escalation clause, and that is essentially a promise to sellers that they'll pay more than the asking price in theory. Sometimes it's just more than their current offer if there's competition. And so we're seeing more and more of that, which means, right, that buyers are starting to feel a little bit of pressure to compete and fight for a house versus make the offer that they feel like is better for them. At the same time, we're seeing a little bit of a shift with the contingencies included in the contract. And the data that we have tracks financing and the inspection addendums. Again, just a slight decline in the financing addendums. This is the financing contingency, 1%. And we saw a 2% decline in the inspection addendums that were included. So again, marginal when you look at them week over week, but when you start to look at them in a larger scale, you start to see, okay, well, we were seeing more like 70 something percent for the financing addendums, and we were seeing inspections about 50% or more of the time. And so we're just starting to see a slow week over week constriction in the amount of contingencies included in the contracts. So not only are we seeing people paying over asking price more often, again, not all the time, but we're also seeing more offers that are being competitive or feeling the need to be competitive to get their offer accepted. Now, Snohomish County is different. It's not the same as King County. And so if you're looking in Snohomish County, you're going to find that your situation is a little bit different. And we're seeing that in Snohomish County, the median sales price over the past week was $757. So much more reasonable median sales price, right? Again, it just depends on your situation. We saw a median sales price previously $778, and this number changes, right, week to week pretty drastically. So the month-long snapshot is better, and that's what the housing market updates, the monthly ones are for, is to get a little bit better snapshot of the overall market for the month. But that's also different than what we're doing here, which is, hey, this is what just happened. This is what's under contract. This is what's fresh and new. Now, the percentage of list price, 98% over the past week versus 99%. So a little bit less than King County, which was at 99% as we were talking about. But some of that competition is still there in Snohomish County. It is not by any means uncompetitive, but it did remain less competitive. There is more negotiating. If we look at some of these other numbers, like the multiple offers, 24% this last week, so a little less than King County. That was the same as the previous week in Snohomish County. 4% had escalation clauses, so not as much of the price pressure, right? We saw more financing addendums this week in Snohomish County, 81% versus 73% the previous week. And we also saw more inspection addendums, 43% the previous week, 49% this week. So we talked about King County, right? We kind of have a little bit of a tale of two worlds. The King County market being a little bit hotter than the Snohomish County market. At the moment, I would suspect that we're going to start to see the Snohomish County market picking up a little bit too, especially as the inventory starts to shift. Now, one thing that King County has going for it that Snohomish County doesn't have going for it is the proximity to work. And there are certainly plenty of employers that are in Snohomish County, but a large percentage of people that are working in Bellevue and Seattle are going to be closer to work if they live in King County versus Snohomish County. And something that I'm going to be paying more attention to, and I think we all should be paying attention to, is where are people wanting to live? Because I've noticed more people starting to shift their focus towards the city and closer in than the farther out suburbs. And people are starting to, again, think more about location versus what the house offers. I think the past few years since COVID, people started thinking, this is what I need in my house because I'm in my house so much. And now I think the shift is back to, how long is my commute? What's my quality of life? During the day, would I rather have a little smaller or older house with less of a yard and be close to work? Or do I really need to have that double home office setup or the home office set up in a big backyard? So I think people are having to make some tough choices. People that maybe bought houses farther away are maybe considering that they want to be closer into the city as well. So I think those are some of the conversations I've been having with people in buyer consultations. And I think they're important things to consider. What is most important to you in buying a house or where you live? And usually people have to make a choice between the location or the type of house that they have purchased or are purchasing, because there are very few people that can get whatever they want and have it all, so to speak, in the house, unless you're Bill Gates, right? And so you have to make choices based on those things and how they are important to you. Thanks so much for tuning into this week's Seattle Housing Market Watch. If you made it all the way to the end here, please give it a thumbs up if it brought some value to your life and your understanding of the Seattle real estate market. And if there's any way that I can support you, whether that's buying or selling or investing in real estate here in the greater Seattle area, I'd love to be a resource for you.